So for the more visual people, my apologies. Wait a second. Just a second. I'm forgetting something. Oh yeah, your hands. Yes, that's the one. It says biddle, right? That's the rallying cry of the Ethereum community. The prices go up, the prices go down, shit happens. We don't care. We keep building. So, because we are so early in the life cycle of this technology, it's kind of so early in the blockchain space that it's very easy to forget that it's not about the money. So when I was 21 years old, I was going through a big dot-com boom. My dad had retired with $12,000 in his bank account, and I had just moved to the United States in the middle of the dot-com boom. Suddenly I had $500,000 in my bank account. I didn't know what to do with that shit, right? So my dad retires with $10,000. A year in the US, I have $500,000. I don't know what to do with it. So what do? I put a whole bunch of that into even more speculative microcap stocks. 6 months later, I have $50,000. So if that sounds familiar, we're going through that all over again. Right? Now, it turns out that a few years later, few being 12, is it 12? Another 20 years later, we have $3 trillion companies. There is Apple, there is Amazon, there's nearly that, Google, and there is obviously more stuff around like Facebook, a few hundred billion here or there, right? So that's the kind of stuff we are dealing with here. So if you're feeling terrible today that the markets are down, shit happens, we'll come back up. So what do we do, right? So what's the topic? The topic is about corporate venturing. So this is about creating great businesses with fiat money. It's not about, crypto is interesting. Yes, it's been very interesting with all the ICO stuff, yes. But that's not what it's about. It's about creating new business models. So this whole utility token movement is a hypothesis, right? So the hypothesis is that we can actually create peer-to-peer business models. So when we talk about peer-to-peer, so people say decentralized. Decentralized is a political word. I know Consensus we use that word a lot. But at the end of the day, what we are saying is we're creating peer-to-peer business models. Now, what's the big deal? So today, once upon a time, we had really centralized platforms. And things like Black Cab or things like Yellow Cab in New York, right? So there's a union. If you want to take a taxi, you have to work with that union. If you don't take their yellow cabs, you can't get a ride. That's how things used to work. Now we've got Uber. I can actually decide when I want to drive a cab. I can decide when I don't want to drive a cab. So I come online. Uber is a centralized platform that connects me to a passenger, and then I take that ride. Fantastic. So now we have peer-to-peer interactions enabled by a centralized intermediary, right? So it's no longer this union, this massive infrastructure intermediary, and with medallions or Black Cab that charges you whatever they want because it's fancy, it's part of our tradition, it's cool, but it charges you twice the money, right? So we don't do that anymore. We get in the cab with strangers, and we pay them the lowest price we can do at that time based on demand and supply. So we are already going from centralized platforms to slightly more decentralized platforms, except the decentralized platforms are now enabled by centralized intermediaries, right? Marketplaces. Amazon. You can sell your stuff on Amazon. You can connect to just about anyone on Amazon, but you have to go through Amazon. And Amazon, as a result, has become a massive digital infrastructure intermediary which dominates the internet. If you don't work with Amazon, you don't have a business, right? Because Amazon is going to undercut you on prices. Same thing with Facebook. Facebook has your identity. If you don't exist on Facebook, maybe your mom in India doesn't recognize you anymore. It certainly happened to me. Well, you don't need to know that, right? So we live in a world where a few big intermediaries like Netflix, they dominate the world, right? Shit is not working. It's not working because now these guys are abusing our information and our assets, right? So Facebook sells your data to the NSA, sells your data to a bunch of advertisers. So it's really easy for us to interact with the internet, and these guys have done a tremendous job of making the consumer experience so much better. But as a result, we've got other problems, right? I mean, it's really easy on the front end, but it's terrible on the back end when you find out that your information got stolen, you do not exist if these guys don't think you exist. The Chinese government can call up Facebook and say, hey, I want to know what Ajit's been doing when he was in Shanghai. That's not nice. So the consumer experience on the front end is brilliant. The consumer experience on the back end is shitty. It's got to be fixed. And today, consumers only care about convenience. We become lazy, and it's beautiful, right? It's all easy. You click, shit happens. Wonderful. But that's changing. As a result, we have GDPR, right? Especially in Europe, we are far more sensitive to data privacy. We are far more careful about who is using our information for what. These internet intermediaries are getting regulated. So the world is about to change. The other force is openness, right? Facebook had open APIs. The purpose of that was to force everyone onto their platform. And now banks are being asked to open up APIs. That's PSD2. So what does that mean? On one hand, we are asking everyone to be open and create open platforms. On the other hand, we are saying, wait, you can't abuse the consumers anymore, right? So just like the banks abused consumers for a while and got massively regulated, I used to work for an investment bank. We had a great time. My salary was 4 times what I get paid now. It was beautiful, right? But that went away. For 8 years, we had a spate of regulation, and now banking doesn't look as sexy as it used to be. Same thing is going to happen on the internet. So consumer behaviors are changing, right? We are at the cusp of an intergenerational change. So my corporate clients, I don't do anything with crypto. I do a lot with blockchain. So the corporate clients, big banks, financial institutions, energy companies, you name them, a whole bunch of people in the boardroom are aware of what's going on, right? So people are doing scenario planning and saying, shit, something is changing here, right? So we can't do our business the way we've been doing. And that's where this whole idea of corporate venturing comes in. Now, corporates also struggle to innovate, right? When any of us who worked in big companies, I've always worked in big companies, it's very, very hard to disrupt your business. It's just impossible because, you know what, when you create something new and dramatic and it's 10 times better, but it's going to hurt somebody's job, someone who is in power, someone who's maybe my age, 42, whatever, become really comfortable, doesn't want to change anything, gets really well paid, doesn't know how else to get a job outside of this company. When we innovate, we threaten people's jobs. It's just the nature of innovation, right? And there is a backlash. The immune system of these large companies, of corporations, reacts to it, and innovation gets killed. If you've been in a blockchain innovation lab, if you have ever worked in a large corporate, if you tried to innovate with blockchain inside a bank, oh God, it's something, right? And the banks are aware. So the banks, large corporations, energy companies, just about everyone is aware that it's very, very difficult to innovate inside an existing business. It's the innovator's dilemma, right? So yes, we want to cannibalize our own businesses. We want to create great new businesses. But at the end of the day, the corporate execs are not incentivized in the right way to create these businesses. As in, you don't even own equity in a new business inside a company, right? If you create $1 billion business, the best you get to do is keep your job. You might get promoted. You might get another $1 million. What's the big deal, right? Whereas if you do that for Facebook, it's a very, very different equation. If you create a startup today and it becomes a unicorn, it's a very different value proposition. So the big companies across the world are saying, how do we do this better? How do we actually innovate? Because we don't have the right incentives. And innovation isn't about technology. It's about people. It's about incentive systems. It's about creating a culture where people are incentivized to take risks and actually do something with their lives and time, right? So now, so that's where people like me come in. That's why I went from PricewaterhouseCoopers, running the UK blockchain business, doing global business development, to working for Consensus, because now Consensus, one of the things we do well is this, we build, right? So we have 40+ startups inside Consensus. We just great at building. We attract a lot of great engineers. We attract a lot of entrepreneurial people who actually want to create great things, right? Who are willing to really do moonshot stuff, things really far ahead into the future, willing to take chances on their own time and their skills, And it's amazing. So we've created this self-selecting ecosystem inside the Ethereum community, and especially inside Consensus, where people are willing to try harder, to really let their imagination go wild. That's why we see so many bad coins, because a lot of those bad coins aren't necessarily bad in intent. The people are really trying to create great things, trying to change this Richard Hendricks, trying to do this Richard Hendricks thing, right? Create the new internet. That's what a lot of people genuinely believe in, and that shit is hard. It's really, really hard to do that, which is why a lot of businesses that are created in a decentralized world don't make sense. But a lot of businesses in 1999 did not make sense, right? Amazon was a bookstore. Who wants to buy books on the internet? Netflix was shipping DVDs. Netflix had recently started something in 2001 where they were saying maybe we should do video over the internet. It was painful. Watching video on dial-up, Jesus Christ, you don't want to do that, right? But look at us now. So we are in year 2000. We are in 1997, 98, 99. Now, the senior people in the boardrooms who've been around are aware of this. So they're saying we need to create startups, right? We need to create startups inside big corporations. And when you do that, then your immune system reacts, because the startup is a very different animal, right? A startup is incentivized to take risk. Large established corporations are incentivized to minimize risk and create predictability in operations. How do you do both of those things? So there has been a lot of academic work in this area. Eric Rice of Lean Startup wrote a book called The Startup Way. It talks about how he worked with General Electric to create a whole startup ecosystem and innovation ecosystem inside General Electric. We're doing that sort of work now with a lot of different large corporations around the world, right? Because we know how to innovate. I mean, that's our DNA. And big companies don't. So we sort of do this gene transplant when we work with them, and we say, this is our methodology, these are our tools, this is how we incentivize our people, this is how you use blockchain. So we start all the way from education, saying, this is what blockchain is really about, these are the applications we are seeing, this is what works, this is what doesn't work, these are the massive problems you're going to face, but wait, technology is coming. Right, so we work with our clients, and we walk them through step by step and say, let's find what are those 10 big ideas that prepare you for this decentralized world. What can you do today with blockchain? What can you do with blockchain in 3 years or 5 years? And blockchain is fundamentally about creating ecosystems, right? It's about network businesses. So, you go back 5 years, and regulators wouldn't let you touch the public cloud. If you're a bank, and you said, I want to price my credit instruments over the public cloud, Amazon Web, AWS, regulators would literally throw up, right? It was a violent conversation. You couldn't do that. Morgan Stanley did it anyways. They went out and said, we're going to price our credit portfolio on the internet, on AWS, because it's not like we are releasing any client information, it's just instruments. We can price that stuff, and we can risk that stuff. And now public cloud is everywhere. So today, if you want to talk to the regulators and say, we want to do stuff on the public blockchain, you get exactly the same response that you used to get 5 years ago when you talked about public cloud. But things are changing. I got a list of clients who are asking me and others at Consensus, how do we create a business? How do we prepare for this decentralized future? How do we create a business that makes us relevant, keeps us relevant in a peer-to-peer world? What capabilities do we need to build? What solutions, what components, what tools do we need to build that prepare us for that future? Because, look, there is a chance that future may never happen, right? But they're also saying, if that future happens, we are screwed. We got a big problem, right? Because we are designed to operate in a very centralized way where we control the assets, where we control the information, where we have these gated doors that nobody can get into. What if that changes? What if consumer preferences change? What do we do? So that's what, go back 3 years, 4 years, R3 was the big deal. They're still around, good for them. 74 banks coming together, putting in a little bit of money. Consortium, everybody wanted to build a consortium. But a consortium does not build an ecosystem, right? A consortium is not a natural business ecosystem. It's just a bunch of people saying, let's experiment. No, experiments don't make a business. Yes, you need to experiment, but you need to have a plan as to what you're trying to build. So 74 banks, very interesting. Another 10 banks, very interesting. Great, but it's it's really, really hard to deliver projects inside a consortium. We work with a bunch of consortia where we focus on building an ecosystem, right? How does the value flow in a network? How do you create a network business that generates far more accretive value than you can create in in the walls of one or two corporations? Who else needs to be in the network for that, the value of that network to be disproportionately higher than the value of one or two of those businesses? Those are the questions, right? Who else needs to be in that ecosystem? Who's got complementary capabilities? Who's bringing what to the table? How do you combine those capabilities to create value for the consumer that you could not do today, or that you couldn't have done yesterday? So when you start asking those questions, and when you start constructing networks and ecosystems, when you start sort of envisioning how you want business ecosystems to operate, then you come up with much better results than if you're saying, oh, let's get together, we are 10 banks, that's interesting, right? 10 banks are interesting. What's far more interesting is when you have a bank, an energy company, somebody who is actually going to inspect the ship, a shipper, then you create a business ecosystem, right? And for technology players like us, that creates massively interesting possibilities. Then we start saying, wait, what is our role here? How do we help you create that ecosystem? How do we, regulators are part of that ecosystem, right? How do we help you create that network business? That's what really blockchain is about. It's about creating networked business models that you cannot do otherwise. Where you can create much more value in a semi-trustless environment that you couldn't do otherwise. So we're seeing a lot of great results from that. We are starting to create some dramatic new businesses. You will hear a lot more about them. Then there is the structural part of it, which is how do we structure a venture? How do we actually, who gets what share of the pie? But fundamentally, it's how do we create the biggest pie in a network? So I think that's a much more helpful framework for thinking about network business models than saying, let's create a consortium, right? Consortia are interesting, but what it's really about is creating network businesses and ecosystems. And there are a bunch of concrete examples that I could cite. So please take a look at Comgo, the Commodities Trade Finance Consortium. It's a consortium, but it's not just a consortium. It's an ecosystem of companies that have come together in a very interesting way, right, to create incentives for every participant to create a very healthy commodities trading and trade finance business. Now that's possible in a network world, right? That's the step one of decentralization. Step two is when we then open up that network at some point, maybe that network or some other network, and then enable other parties to come in an open marketplace, right, where it's no longer about, oh, it's only 10 of us. So Comgo is not a consortium. Comgo is an open platform, which means people can join, people can leave, right? It's a relatively seamless process. Yes, there is a lot of regulation in that space, so we have to really carefully make sure that the processes are followed and there are controls and all of that. Yes, it's a grown-up business, right? But at the same time, this whole idea of open platforms is so much more powerful than the idea of closed consortia. And going forward, we're going to see more and more of that because the value of something like that is disproportionately higher than the value of a closed consortium. So what's the bottom line? When we think about creating businesses with blockchain, first of all, the technology is a lot less interesting than the businesses that we can create in a network world, right? When we create those business models, then we backfill the technology. We create the technology that makes those businesses possible. But you got to have that business idea first. And so 3 or 4 bullet points to summarize. The first one is, when you think blockchain, think network business models. Think ecosystems, not consortia, right? Consortia are boring, ecosystems are powerful. Think about creating accretive value that is not possible for any of those entities to create. Think across value chains. Think not just within one industry, but think about how different parts of that value chain come together to create much more value than they can do today, right? And then going forward, from this step one of decentralization, which is corporate venturing, then we say, how do we open up this platform to other parties? How do we open up this platform to consumers, right? How do we decentralize? How do we democratize access to that value? And that's where a lot of these experiments that are going on. Now, here is the thing. All the innovation in this space is in public blockchains. Keep an eye on the public blockchains. So keep an eye on all the insane, crazy stuff that people are creating in the ICO world, right? Because they're coming up with ideas that are simply impossible to come up with inside a corporate environment. And then we project those. Someone like me who's been in corporations all my life, you kind of take a look at all this crazy stuff and you say, what do I do with this? And that inspires a whole host of ideas inside boardrooms that then we can create businesses off of. That's pretty much it for me. Thank you.